The desert begins to breathe when the heat begins to fade. Long before night, the dunes are already in motion. Slow tides of gold and shadow, whispering across the endless expanse between Saqqara and Fayum. Beneath this ocean of silence, something stirs. It is not legend. It is not a mirage. In 1926, a French archaeologist named Etienne Marceau wrote of a structure he found here. Fragments of limestone pillars unlike any known temple of the Old Kingdom. Each column bore carvings of constellations instead of hieroglyphs, their alignment echoing the winter stars that crown Orion. Marceau's notes, preserved in the archives of Cairo, speak of geometry beyond dynasties, and of a faint sound that seemed to rise from below, like breath caught in the sand. The Bedouins who guided him refused to return. They said the dunes moved differently there, as if obeying an older wind. Weeks later, a sandstorm buried the site once more, and Marceau's discovery vanished beneath a wave of dust so complete it seemed deliberate. To this day, no expedition has relocated it. Only scattered photographs remain, pale fragments showing columns half unearthed, the desert curling around them like an ancient hand reclaiming its own secret. When the air cools after sunset, the silence deepens until it feels alive. Under moonlight, the dunes resemble frozen waves. Every ridge of motion paused in time. Sometimes, when the wind falls still, there is a hum, low and steady, vibrating through the soles of one's feet. Geologists call it seismic resonance. The desert's shifting layers trap and release air in tones too low for hearing. Yet those who have stood there at night insist the sound is not beneath, but within, as if the sand remembers voices. In old temple texts from Abydos, there is a single passage about the place where the stars were carved into stone before the first pharaoh wore his crown. No site has ever matched that description, unless one counts these buried ruins, whose markings trace constellations unknown to ancient Egypt, patterns seen only from skies 10,000 years older. It raises quiet questions. Was this the memory of an age that vanished before history began, or a temple built to echo what heaven once looked like? Imagine standing there, the cold sand underfoot, the night expanding around you. The stars shimmer like dust scattered by unseen hands. Every grain feels connected to something vast, patient, waiting. The archaeologist's notebook closes with one final line, smudged but still legible. The dunes move to protect the geometry of creation. Perhaps that is why the desert covers it again and again. Not out of cruelty, but reverence, to shield what belongs to silence. When dawn arrives, the horizon glows with the pale light of new breath. No trace of columns remains. No sound, no mark. Only the hush of endless sand, drifting back to sleep. And somewhere beneath, the hum continues, the echo of a temple breathing through eternity. The wind at Dashur often carries more than dust. It carries memory, the kind that clings to stone long after words have vanished. A few miles from the buried ridges where Marceau's lost temple sleeps, another discovery was once made, half forgotten in academic journals and field notes that gather more silence than attention. In 1932, a British survey team cataloging early pyramid sites reported something strange. A single limestone slab found deep beneath collapsed masonry, unlike anything from known dynasties. Its carvings were not hieroglyphs, nor any discernible script. They were constellations, exact star patterns from 10,500 BCE, the same alignment that scholars now recognize in the celestial mapping of the Giza Plateau. At first, it was dismissed as a curiosity, perhaps a decorative piece, perhaps even coincidence. But the slab's precision went beyond ornament. Each star cluster was inlaid with traces of blue pigment that laboratory analysis decades later identified as Egyptian blue, the world's first synthetic pigment, but used here in a manner older than its known invention. The pigment was found deep in the grooves, preserved like the breath of night sealed in stone. The archaeologist who supervised the find, Dr. Helen Cartwright, noted something peculiar in her journal. The alignment is not toward the sun, but toward the soundless. In one of his final reports, El-Khalil connected the alignment of the stones to the heliacal rising of Sirius around 4,800 BCE, the same period associated with the mythic first time. The era when the gods, according to Egyptian lore, walked the earth. The tones he recorded during those nights, he claimed, formed a repeating pattern. For pulses, a pause, then three. A sequence mirrored in the spacing of the stones themselves. The desert, he wrote, is the instrument, and the sky is the hand that plays it. By his third month at the site, he stopped using equipment altogether. He wrote that he could hear the tones without the wind, that the stars themselves seemed to hum through his breath. His assistant, who visited briefly in April of 1978, found him thinner, quieter, eyes reflecting the shimmer of the night sky. He said the air was singing, she recalled, and that the song was older than light. On the night of June 23rd, during the summer solstice, El Khalil made his final entry. It reads simply, "The rhythm has returned. I must follow it." The next day, his camp was empty. His instruments remained untouched, his tent uncollapsed. There were no footprints leading away, only concentric circles of disturbed sand spreading outward from where he had stood. When the authorities arrived, they found the stones humming faintly, not from wind, but from vibration. Seismic monitors detected microtremors synchronized with the rotation of the Earth itself, the Schumann resonance, the planet's natural electromagnetic heartbeat. It was as if Nabtaplaya had been built to amplify the very breath of the world. Modern science has measured these same frequencies, 7.83 Hz, the pulse that binds the ionosphere and the Earth. Yet to those ancient astronomers, it may have been something else entirely. The sound of creation, the voice of eternity whispering through sand and bone. Today, at dusk, the stones remain. Travelers who spend a night there speak of dreams filled with light and distant choruses, of stars that seem to blink in rhythm with their own heartbeat. Geologists call it coincidence, wind harmonics, the psychology of solitude. But perhaps the truth lies somewhere between silence and song, in the breath that connects all things. For the gods, the ancients believed, never left. They simply exhaled once, long ago, and the universe has been listening ever since. And when the wind moves through those stones, it carries that breath still, steady, eternal, patient. The sound of the sky remembering its own creation. In the cliffs beyond the Valley of the Kings, where the rock turns the color of old honey at sunset, there lies a chamber known only by its excavation code, KV73B. It was discovered in 1989, sealed so tightly within the limestone that the air within had not stirred since before the time of Ramses. At first, it appeared to be a small, unfinished tomb, a narrow entrance, a short descending corridor, and a single square chamber. But what made it extraordinary was not what was found inside, but what seemed to awaken after it was opened. The archaeologist in charge, Dr. Helena Cross, was a measured woman, trained in carbon dating, skeptical of myth. Her first report reads like every other field summary. Chamber contains no sarcophagus. Central platform composed of compacted sand, arranged in an anthropoid shape approximately 2 meters long. Yet her later notes grow increasingly uncertain. The sand, she observed, was not loose. It seemed to hold form, soft, but unmoving, like fabric suspended underwater. The surface bore ripples that changed imperceptibly from day to day, though no wind touched them. That phrase has puzzled historians ever since. The walls were blank.
No paintings, no text, no inscriptions.
But under raking light, faint impressions appeared. Outlines of eyes, lips, hands, erased as if from the inside. Ground-penetrating radar revealed hollow cavities beneath the floor, arranged like chambers of a lung. The instruments registered a low-frequency hum, repeating at intervals of precisely 60 beats per minute, the rhythm of a human resting heartbeat. Cross dismissed it at first as mechanical interference. But when the team turned off their equipment, the sound remained, faint, steady, alive. Over the next week, every attempt to document the chamber produced anomalies. Photographs blurred. Audio tapes played back voices that had not been spoken. Workers complained of hearing whispers from the walls. Phrases half-formed, like speech emerging through sleep. One sentence was reportedly clear enough to transcribe, "I am not gone." They withdrew from the site after one of the assistants, a young Egyptologist named Omar, collapsed during documentation. He later claimed he had felt something like breath against his ear before fainting. Medical scans showed nothing unusual, except for a mild change in his brain's theta waves, the same frequency pattern seen during deep dream states. Weeks later, Cross wrote in her private journal that she began dreaming nightly of the chamber. In her dreams, she lay where the sand effigy rested, and the walls pulsed softly with light. "It feels," she wrote, "as though the tomb is asleep and it is dreaming of us." Further analysis of soil samples brought another revelation. The sand was not native to Thebes. It originated from the Wadi Nat Run, hundreds of miles north, a place the ancients considered sacred to the god of resurrection. Embedded within the grains were microscopic fragments of human bone, pulverized so finely they resembled dust. The tomb had not been built to house a body. It had been built from one. A Coptic chronicle from the 6th century mentions a chamber of breath in the desert west of Thebes, a sanctuary said to contain the last sleeping priest of the old religion, whose dream would sustain the memory of the gods until the world forgot them. The text describes him not as dead, but as turned inward, waiting for the return of names once spoken under stars. Cross never returned to the field. Her final recorded statement to the Ministry of Antiquities is brief. "We opened something that was not meant to wake. Today, the entrance to KV 73B has been resealed. It is not listed on public excavation maps. Yet local guides say that on nights when the moon is high, the cliffs emit a deep vibration, a hum that seems to rise from the stone itself. Some describe it as a heartbeat. Others say it is only the wind echoing through empty corridors. But the Bedouin who live nearby refuse to go near it after dark. They believe the tomb still dreams, and that every dream it breathes becomes one more thought in the world above. When evening descends upon that plain, the horizon turns to copper and shadow. The pyramids at Dashur, the bent and the red, catch the fading light, their angles glowing with the color of blood and sand. And there, beside them, lies the foundation trench where the star stone was once unearthed. Locals say the slab hummed when touched, a faint vibration that could be felt rather than heard. Instruments registered nothing. Some claimed it was merely the pulse of the earth, others that it was the body's own rhythm reflected back. But those who lingered there too long described something deeper, the sense of being watched not by gods but by time itself. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps memory itself sleeps, waiting beneath the earth for those who will remember it again. And when that happens, when the veil between dream and waking thins, perhaps the tomb will not open outward, but inward, pulling us gently into the world it has been dreaming all along. For what is death, if not a story waiting to be dreamed once more? Far to the west, where the Libyan desert opens into an endless plain of pale dust, archaeologists uncovered a solitary temple known as Aten Kahet, the house of the sun's last breath. It lay half-buried in wind-carved ridges, its pillars eroded smooth as bone. The excavation, begun in 1996 by an Anglo-Egyptian team under Dr. Lucian Graves, revealed something unlike any other site. A sanctuary built not for worship, but for farewell. At its heart stood a single figure carved in alabaster, a woman kneeling, her hands cupped before her chest, her eyes closed. Around her, the walls shimmered faintly under torchlight, engraved with lines of text so delicate they seemed to move when the flame flickered. The inscriptions were not prayers for the dead, but messages written to the sun itself. The language, a rare transitional dialect between late Hieratic and Proto-Coptic, spoke of light that chooses to turn away, and a priestess whose duty was to hold the final dawn until the earth forgets its name. The local Bedouins had long whispered of a temple of the last light, where a woman once kept vigil for the dying sun. They claimed she was neither mortal nor divine, but something in between, the last voice of an age the world no longer remembers. Her title, She Who Faces the Reflection, appears carved above the temple gate, though her true name has been lost to erosion. Dr. Graves' journals, later found in his Cairo apartment, describe his first night inside the temple. The air was thick with the scent of salt. There should be no salt this far from the sea. He wrote that the stone floor glittered faintly in the darkness, as if covered in a thin film of dew. The expedition chemist found the residue to be sodium chloride mixed with calcium carbonate, the mineral signature of evaporated tears. On the second night, the team heard faint tones emanating from the statue. When the wind passed through the inner hall, it produced a soft, fluting hum, tuned to a perfect A below middle C. Instruments confirmed no airflow strong enough to cause vibration. Yet the sound persisted, rising and falling like measured breathing. Behind the main chamber, a hidden passage led to a small alcove lined with jars sealed with resin. Inside were sheets of papyrus, preserved perfectly despite the centuries. The writings described the rite of the last dawn, a ceremony performed once every 1,000 years, when the solar cycle of the gods completed its passage. On that morning, the priestess was to face the rising sun without turning away, capturing its reflection in water before the light could strike her skin. It was said that whoever looked directly into the last dawn would carry its memory forever, even when the sun was gone. At the end of the ritual text, a single sentence stands apart. When the sky closes its eyes, I will remain open. The inscriptions, when studied under ultraviolet light, revealed faint traces of additional markings, spirals intersecting the star maps, as though linking each constellation with something unseen. A small fragment of Greek papyrus found nearby, dating to the Ptolemaic period, mentions the elder stone that sang beneath the moon, possibly a reference to the same artifact. Yet, inexplicably, the slab disappeared during transport to Cairo in 1934. Its crate arrived empty, its number quietly retired from the museum ledger. Only Cartwright's notebooks and a handful of glass negatives remain, ghost images of stars engraved into silence. The discovery should have been celebrated, yet within months the temple was abandoned. The government ordered a halt to excavation after a series of inexplicable accidents. Equipment failing, compasses spinning, batteries draining in seconds. Dr. Graves withdrew from public life soon after. In his final letter, addressed to his colleague in Oxford, he wrote only, "She still looks at me when I sleep." Years later, a satellite survey captured something strange. During the equinox, at the exact moment the first ray of sunlight touched the horizon, a brief glimmer of reflected light appeared at the coordinates of Aten Kahet. It lasted 3 seconds, a pure white flare, as though the temple itself exhaled the dawn it had kept. Today, no official record of the site remains, but travelers in that region speak of a figure seen at sunrise. A woman standing among the stones, her face turned toward the east, her hands outstretched as if holding light. Some say she appears only in the moment before the sun clears the horizon, and that when the first full beam strikes, she fades like mist. Perhaps the priestess never died. Perhaps she became what she served, a vessel of memory, endlessly repeating the moment of dawn so that it will never truly vanish. And perhaps the sun, weary of rising, entrusted its light to her, to guard it in the silence between night and morning, in that fragile instant when the world decides to awaken again. For even light, it seems, requires a keeper. And somewhere in that forgotten desert, the last dawn still waits, suspended in a woman's outstretched hands, glowing softly against the endless pale of time. At the edge of the western desert, where the dunes end and the rock rises again in slow, broken waves, there lies a place where maps turn blank, a plateau the locals call Dar al-Samt, the House of Silence. It is not marked by ruins, nor by monuments, but by absence. Pilots flying over it have reported that their instruments falter for several minutes as they pass above. Sound vanishes, the wind ceases, even the mechanical hum of the engines dims, replaced by a stillness so absolute that it feels alive. The first written mention of this place appears in a forgotten 12th century manuscript from the monastery of St. Anthony. A monk named Theophilus described it as a desert of echoes where even prayer cannot return. His account, half travelogue and half confession, tells of wandering beyond the last oasis until the air became heavy as stone and the sky lost its color. When he tried to speak, he wrote, "My voice fell to the ground like dust." Centuries later, in 1934, a British geologist named Andrew Holbrook, while surveying sandstone formations in that region, recorded something similar. His compass refused to hold north. His watch stopped. He camped near a ridge that seemed perfectly symmetrical, like a wall built by no human hand. At dawn, he heard what he described as a pulse of air, slow and immense, like a breath drawn inward. When he shouted to test the echo, the sound did not return. The silence swallowed it whole. It is easy to imagine the scene as she must have seen it. Kneeling beside that pale monolith, the night wind stirring her lantern flame, dust glinting like constellations reborn. She would have traced the grooves with her fingertips, feeling the slight vibration, hearing the desert's low hum blending with her own heartbeat. In that moment, perhaps she understood why the ancients carved stars into stone. Not to worship the heavens, but to listen to them. No one believed him until 1959, when a joint Egyptian-French team set up seismic equipment near the same ridge. The instruments detected minute oscillations, waves too regular to be geological, occurring every 62 seconds, as if the ground itself were exhaling. The readings ceased when the researchers stepped back beyond the plateau's edge. Inside that invisible boundary, time and vibration seemed to fold inward, as though the earth were holding its breath. The team abandoned the site after 3 days. 2 of the researchers later reported recurring dreams of standing before a vast gate made of lightless stone, carved with spirals that turned endlessly inward. Both described hearing a single tone, deep and steady, which continued even after waking. Their physicians found no cause. The sound, they said, was imagined, a phantom frequency of the mind. Yet both men, living continents apart, drew the same spiral in their sleep journals. No formal expedition has returned since. The desert reclaimed the paths, erasing the tire tracks and markers. Only scattered accounts remain. Travelers who wander too far and speak of strange calm, of shadows that move without light, of voices that whisper not from outside, but within. Bedouins say that beyond the ridge lies Bab al-Samt, the gate of stillness, the point where the world ends and the next begins. Not death, they insist, but the threshold where sound returns to its source. In 2012, a satellite equipped with ground-penetrating radar captured anomalies under that region, vast, circular voids, each nearly a kilometer wide, stacked like nested rings beneath the surface. Their depth could not be measured. Some scientists speculated they were collapsed magma chambers. Others stayed silent. One of the analysts who reviewed the data wrote in a private email, later leaked, "Whatever lies beneath does not reflect. It absorbs." To this day, no one has explained why magnetic fields weaken there, or why migratory birds avoid its airspace. When the wind shifts from the east, travelers on the outer dunes sometimes hear faint harmonics, low, regular tones that fade as one approaches. It is said that standing at the very edge of the plateau, one can feel the vibration beneath one's feet, a heartbeat not of the body, but of the world. Perhaps Dar al-Samt is not a place at all, but a condition, the echo of creation's last pause, a space where all things return to stillness before beginning again. The ancient texts call such silence Kanefer, the beautiful rest, when the gods inhale before speaking life anew. At night, the stars above the plateau appear unusually bright, their light sharpened by the absence of sound. To stand there is to feel suspended between earth and sky, between presence and dissolution. The silence does not threaten. It enfolds. It listens back. Maybe that is the secret the ancients sought in all their temples and tombs, not eternity, but the stillness that cradles it. The silence before the first word, the last breath before creation begins again. And if one were to cross that invisible line, to step fully into the quiet beyond the threshold, perhaps they would not vanish at all. Perhaps they would simply become part of the pause. For what if the sky once spoke? What if, long before history was written, people believed that stars were not distant fires but voices, breathing through the firmament? In temples now lost, priests may have recited hymns not in praise, but in translation, trying to echo what the cosmos whispered to them. When the wind rises after midnight, the dunes shift again, uncovering fragments of stone too smooth to be natural. The air hums faintly, as though remembering, and somewhere beneath, the buried geometry awakens. Not in words, but in rhythm, the same pulse that moves through all things living and forgotten. Perhaps the stone still lies there, listening. Perhaps it is waiting for the night when the stars will once again form the name it once spoke. Beneath the cracked foundations of an unnamed necropolis west of Luxor, an opening was once found, a narrow shaft that led into shadow. The air inside was warm, too still for such depth, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. At the end of that shaft, explorers discovered a chamber unlike any known burial hall or shrine. The walls were not carved, but lined with a smooth, obsidian-like surface, dark and faintly luminous. When torches flickered, their light did not return as reflection, but as mist, a shimmer that seemed to breathe. The discovery was recorded in 1954 by Dr. Salim El-Amin, an Egyptian archaeologist known for his meticulous work around Thebes. He called it the mirror chamber, though he admitted that the surfaces behaved unlike glass or polished metal. Chemical tests taken later found traces of black silica and meteoritic iron, a combination never before seen in Egyptian architecture. The chamber was small, nearly circular, and when one entered, every sound seemed to vanish. Even the scrape of a boot dissolved mid-air. "It is not silence," El-Amin wrote. "It is the feeling of being absorbed." Within the walls, faint shapes would appear, not as reflections, but as ghostly movements. A figure turning away, a flame rippling backward, the echo of one's own motion returning a second too late. Some believed it to be a trick of the eyes, others a phenomenon of the strange material itself. Yet ancient funerary texts mention the Hall of Shadows, a place where the soul sees what the sun cannot. No such sight had ever been verified until this one. When electric lamps were brought in, something extraordinary happened. The light did not illuminate the room. It deepened it. The glow seemed to sink into the walls as if being drunk by the stone. Only the ceiling shimmered faintly, revealing an engraving so fine it could barely be traced. Concentric circles resembling ripples on water. In their center, one symbol repeated 3 times. An open eye surrounded by rays that bent inward, toward darkness rather than outward toward light. Later, a scholar of Coptic texts, Mariam Fahmy, compared this to an apocryphal manuscript known as the Book of Returning Light, which speaks of mirrors that hold the memory of creation, not what has been, but what was meant to be. The book describes these as the first altars, built before temples and tombs, used by priests to commune with the hidden sky beneath the earth. If this chamber was one of those altars, it would make it older than any known Egyptian dynasty, older than the concept of the afterlife itself. When El-Amin's team attempted to remove one of the black panels for study, the slab shattered soundlessly, not breaking apart, but dissolving into a fine, dark vapor that smelled faintly of resin and metal. Days later, several members of the team reported identical dreams. Standing in a vast mirror-lit hall, seeing not themselves, but a procession of stars moving like liquid light across the floor. They wrote these accounts separately, unaware of one another's reports. The mirror chamber was resealed in 1955, its coordinates omitted from official records at El-Amin's request. In his final field note, he wrote, "This place does not reflect. It remembers. It is not meant to be seen twice. Today, no photographs exist, only a sketch of the concentric design and the faint mention of a material that drinks light as water drinks the sun. Some believe it was a naturally occurring obsidian vein shaped by unknown hands. Others whisper that it was built to serve as an intermediary between this world and the one reflected in dream, a threshold that shows not what we are, but what waits to return." At dusk, when the Nile darkens to bronze and the air grows heavy, one might feel that same quiet pull, as if something beneath the earth is still awake, shimmering faintly, waiting to be seen again. Perhaps the chamber still breathes. Perhaps it shows our reflection only when we are no longer looking. Far south of the known ruins of Abydos, where the Nile thins into silence and the wind carries no human echo, satellite imagery once revealed a strange geometry, a circular pattern half buried in the desert's pale skin. Archaeologists dismissed it as erosion, a play of shadows across ancient wadi beds. Yet, in 1978, A small Franco-Egyptian team led by Dr. Camille Durand arrived at the site and confirmed something impossible. Beneath the dunes lay the faint remains of foundations aligned not to the sun, but to sound. The expedition's equipment, simple seismographs used to map underground chambers, registered rhythmic pulses, steady as a heartbeat, emanating from the earth itself. When they traced the source, the data revealed a vast pattern, almost architectural. Dozens of ring-shaped voids arranged in precise intervals, each separated by harmonic distances matching the frequencies of human chant. Durand called it an acoustic city, a structure not meant to be seen but to be heard. At dawn, the desert was quiet enough to hear the grains of sand move. The team reported an auditory illusion, a faint hum, too low for recorders to capture, as if the dunes were murmuring a chorus from beneath. Old Bedouin tales spoke of Qasr al-Sifr, the Palace of Zero, a city that existed only as vibration, its walls woven from sound and wind. Most regarded the myth as poetic allegory, but now, in that lonely valley, the line between legend and geometry began to blur. The layers of sand they excavated revealed nothing solid, only fine quartz dust packed unnaturally dense, fused at intervals by heat. In some places, the grains were melted into thin sheets of glass, circular and precise. When struck, they resonated faintly, as if remembering the frequency that once shaped them. One of the workers pressed his ear to the surface and claimed to hear a pulse, like a drum too far away to reach. Durand's notes, preserved in the Musée del Home, described the city not as a ruin, but as an imprint of an idea. She wrote that the ancients might have constructed sound itself, chanting into carved stone chambers until the vibration aligned with form, crystallizing invisible walls that later dissolved back into the earth. The geometry of these rings, she observed, mirrored the harmonic ratios of early Egyptian temple hymns and the mathematical intervals found in Sumerian music tablets. Two civilizations, separated by time, yet speaking in the same silent measure. At sunset, the sand turned to bronze, and the wind slowed. The valley glowed as if lit from within. Seismic monitors recorded one last pulse, a long, slow rhythm that faded like a sigh. Then, without warning, the devices failed. Their sensors burned as though exposed to heat. The next morning, when the team returned, the surface had shifted overnight. The concentric rings were gone, swallowed again. The coordinates they marked led nowhere. The final line in Durand's journal reads, "Perhaps they built not from matter, but from resonance. And perhaps we, too, are echoes of their architecture." In later years, acoustic engineers analyzed her records and found the harmonic data impossible to reproduce, a frequency pattern unlike any natural vibration. Some compared it to the resonance of the earth itself, the faint oscillation that trembles through all living things. At night, when the wind moves through the dunes near the forgotten site, travelers sometimes hear a faint rhythm in the air, soft, unending, like a prayer sung without language. It rises, falls, then disappears into the vast quiet, as if the city still exhales through its invisible streets. Perhaps the architects built it knowing it would fade. Perhaps they understood that the most sacred structures are not those that stand, but those that remain unheard. In the autumn of 1899, a shipment of papyri arrived at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, fragments purchased from a dealer in Luxor, who claimed they had been found in a collapsed burial chamber near Deir el-Bahari. Most were brittle, illegible, their ink reduced to dust. But among them was one scroll that seemed intact, a slender roll of papyrus sealed with hardened resin. When unwrapped in the museum's restoration room, it shimmered faintly, as if the ink itself still breathed. The curator, Professor Dmitry Kazan, recorded what happened next in a short report written with trembling hand. Before the papyrus could be examined, its surface began to darken, not with flame, but as though the writing itself consumed the light. Within moments, the scroll turned to ash without heat, leaving no residue, only the faint smell of cedar oil and something metallic. Yet for a few seconds before it vanished, those who witnessed it swore they saw words glowing in the air, not in hieratic or demotic script, but in an alphabet no one could name. Kazan kept a single fragment that had fallen aside before the burning. Under magnification, it revealed ink made of pulverized hematite mixed with what modern analysis later identified as antimony trioxide, a compound used in ancient lamps to make the flame burn white. It was as if the scribe had written not with pigment, but with light itself. The curator became obsessed. For years he searched archives across Thebes and Amarna for any mention of similar texts. He found one. A cryptic entry in an 18th dynasty temple record, describing the scrolls that were written for no eye to see. The priests who kept them believed such writings contained knowledge too sacred or too dangerous for the living world. These scrolls, they claimed, were written in living ink, which burns when it remembers. Some historians dismiss this as metaphor, an allegory for forbidden wisdom erased by the passage of time. But the chemistry of Kazan's fragment tells another story. When exposed to ultraviolet light, the surviving flecks glowed briefly, pulsing like embers. They emitted no heat, yet the instruments recorded an increase in surrounding air temperature. A whisper of energy released from nothing. Kazan died in 1906, leaving behind a sealed envelope found among his papers. Inside was a short note and a drawing of a coiled serpent encircling an open flame. His final words were written in French. "It still writes when no one watches." In the decades that followed, scholars speculated that the destroyed scroll might have been part of the so-called Library of Light, a rumored collection of texts believed to have been hidden by the priesthood of Heliopolis during the reign of Akhenaten. According to legend, these writings describe the origin of divine energy as both matter and memory, flame and word, a creation that could not be owned, only remembered. Modern physics would later echo fragments of this thought, that energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed, that light itself holds the memory of everything it touches. Perhaps the ancients understood this not as science, but as reverence. To them, knowledge was not something to possess, but something to release. At night, in the archive rooms of the old museum, guards sometimes report a faint glow where the artifact once lay, a breath of warmth in the darkness, like a candle flame that forgets to die. They say it flickers only when no one is looking directly at it, as if shy or sacred or both. Maybe the scroll still exists, not in paper, not in ink, but in the air that remembers. Perhaps every whisper of flame, every spark that dances in silence, carries the story of those forbidden words. And perhaps that is what the ancients meant when they said, "Some writings are not meant to be read, only to return." In the barren valley east of the Siwa oasis, where the desert stretches like a frozen tide, a formation of stone arches rises from the sand, half swallowed by centuries of wind. To the untrained eye they appear natural, the remains of cliffs worn by time. But early explorers who mapped the region noted something unsettling. Each arch faces a precise celestial direction, forming a spiral that ends at a single, circular portal carved from limestone blackened by heat. Locals call it Bab al-Nam, the Gate of Sleep. In 1937, an Italian geographer, Dr. Enrico Valli, led an expedition into the valley to survey these ruins. His field diary, now preserved in Rome, describes the area as a geometry of silence, shaped by no known hand. The arches measured identical in height and spacing, their alignment pointing not toward Mecca or sunrise, but toward the setting of Sirius, the dog star, ancient Egypt's herald of rebirth. Valli noted that no settlement, temple, or burial ground existed nearby, and no tool marks marred the stone. The site seemed designed not for the living, but for remembrance. The Bedouins who guided him refused to camp near the final arch. They told him the place belonged to the sleepers beneath, whose dreams move with the wind. They warned that travelers who rested there awoke days later, believing they had crossed into another time. Valli dismissed the superstition until the third night, when one of his men vanished from the camp. His footprints led directly to the gate, where the sand was untouched, smooth as glass. Valli wrote that he, too, dreamt of passing through it, of a city bathed in blue light, where towers rose like coral and the air trembled with song. He described hearing languages he could not understand but somehow recognized. When he awoke, the stars above him matched none of his charts. Only when dawn came did they shift back to their familiar places. The circular gate at the spiral's end stands 8 feet high, its surface covered in shallow carvings. Spirals within spirals, interlocking arcs, a pattern that resembles both a fingerprint and a map of the cosmos. Some scholars have since noted its similarity to early Berber petroglyphs and pre-dynastic Egyptian symbols of cyclical time, the eternal return. Others believe it may have been an astronomical instrument, a calendar of the stars before recorded history. Yet, for all their precision, the arches lead nowhere. Behind the final gate is only desert. In 1972, a team of Egyptian archaeologists attempted to excavate the site using ground-penetrating radar. The readings failed catastrophically. The equipment picked up no solid strata, only an inexplicable void beneath the gate, a hollow cavity stretching far deeper than the surrounding terrain. When the team tried to drill, the bit broke cleanly, as though meeting not rock, but resistance of another kind. One of the technicians collapsed soon after, muttering in his sleep a single phrase in ancient Greek. The way of return. He had never studied the language. The valley remains unmarked on official maps, yet those who live near Siwa still speak of it in hushed tones. They say the wind there does not sound the same. It moves in circular patterns, whispering around the arches like breath through a flute. Shepherds claim to see faint lights drifting between the stones on moonless nights. Not torches, but orbs that pulse softly before sinking into the sand. In 2011, a satellite photograph briefly captured what seemed to be a faint glow surrounding the site, a luminous ring lasting less than 2 seconds before fading. Analysts dismissed it as a sensor flare. Yet for those who have stood in that valley, the explanation feels insufficient. Perhaps the gate is not a doorway in the ordinary sense, but a threshold between waking and memory, a monument built not of faith but of resonance. The ancients may have known something we have forgotten, that certain places echo not through time, but through consciousness, a space where the mind itself becomes the traveler. When the wind rises, the sand flows through the arches like water. The air grows colder, and for a moment, the dunes resemble waves in slow motion. If you listen, you can almost hear a hum, faint, rhythmic, like distant breathing. And if you were to fall asleep there, beneath the shadow of the final arch, perhaps you would dream of crossing through, into that city of blue light, where language becomes sound, and sound becomes silence. Perhaps you would awaken days later, unsure if the journey had been real. Or perhaps you would not awaken at all. For some gates, once opened, do not close again. In the desert plain north of Abydos, beneath what had long been thought a minor temple ruin, excavations in 1964 revealed a substructure so intricately carved it baffled the Egyptologists who first entered it. The entrance had been sealed with limestone blocks marked by a single symbol, an open eye enclosed within a spiral. Beneath those stones, the passage descended through layers of sand and bedrock until the air grew cool and still. Torches revealed walls lined not with hieroglyphs, but with an unfamiliar form of script, etched in continuous flowing lines that wound around the chamber like the course of a river. At its center stood a single dais of black granite. Upon it lay tablets of crystallized gypsum, translucent and impossibly thin, each engraved with microglyphs so minute that even magnification failed to clarify their form. When light struck them, the symbols shimmered in patterns, like constellations flickering across water. The discovery was catalogued as Structure 17A, but those who saw it firsthand gave it another name, the library that remembered the future. The supervising archaeologist, Dr. Nabil Fakhri, noted in his report that the chamber's layout appeared designed for acoustics. Even a whisper near the dais produced resonances that rippled through the air, tones that seemed to shift as one moved through the room. "It feels," he wrote, "as if the stones themselves are listening." What astonished the team most, however, was the content of one deciphered section. Using infrared photography, faint outlines emerged from the surface of one tablet, images that appeared to show river deltas and coastlines, but not as they were in antiquity. The configurations matched modern satellite maps of the Nile Basin after the construction of the Aswan High Dam, completed more than 4,000 years later. When news of the find reached Cairo, the artifacts were transferred to the National Museum for preservation. Yet only 3 tablets arrived intact. The others, 7 in total, had turned opaque. Their inscriptions faded as if erased by time itself. Microscopic examination revealed no chemical cause. Their surfaces were smooth and untouched, as though the text had simply withdrawn. One of the researchers, a linguist named Layla Saad, noticed that the patterns on the remaining tablets corresponded to the 26 precession points of the Earth's axial cycle, the great cosmic rhythm that completes once every 25,920 years. Perhaps, she suggested quietly, it is not prophecy but memory repeating itself. Her words were met with silence. Later, a team of physicists from Alexandria University attempted to measure the vibrational frequency of the chamber. When they projected a harmonic tone at 432 Hz, a frequency associated in ancient architecture with resonance and healing, the walls responded. A faint, luminous haze formed above the dais. For a moment, the carved lines on the walls appeared to move, the symbols rearranging themselves like ripples forming new constellations. Instruments recorded a brief electromagnetic surge, then all readings fell to 0. Afterward, the phenomenon could not be reproduced. The chamber was sealed again under government order, declared unstable for preservation. But those who were present claimed to have felt something impossible to measure. A pressure, a stillness, as though time itself had paused to listen. Among Dr. Fakhri's private papers, found decades later, was a handwritten note. The ancients did not write history. They remembered what has not yet happened. If the tablets indeed contained depictions of lands and rivers not yet shaped by human hands, then perhaps the library was not built to record, but to remind, a repository of patterns that return in cycles, where the future is merely an echo of what has already been. Today, at the site near Abydos, the sand covers the entrance once more. Shepherds passing nearby report strange quiet, birds that will not cross above, and wind that hums without direction. Sometimes, at dusk, a faint light seeps through the dunes, flickering like the reflection of a candle beneath the surface. Perhaps it is nothing more than trapped heat or phosphorescent minerals reacting to the night air. But perhaps it is memory itself, still pulsing, waiting for those who will come again, in another age, to read what has already been written in the silence of stone. And when that moment arrives, they will not find prophecy. They will find themselves, deep beneath the limestone plateau of Middle Egypt, beyond the reach of sun or wind. There runs a river no map has ever charted. It is not the Nile, though it feeds from its ancient heart. It moves in silence, flowing through caverns whose ceilings shimmer with crystals formed by millennia of unseen condensation. The Bedouins call it Anar al-Maft, the lost river. They say it has no source and no mouth, that its current circles endlessly beneath the earth, carrying with it the memory of forgotten ages. In 1948, a small geological survey from the University of Alexandria was sent to chart underground aquifers near Minya. While drilling, their equipment struck a hollow that resonated like struck bronze. The sound seemed alive, rhythmic, deep, unlike anything the team had heard. Days later, divers descended through a narrow crevice and emerged into an enormous cavern. There, by the light of their lamps, they saw what the expedition leader, Dr. Yusuf Rahman, would describe as a black mirror in motion. A river flowed below, wide and calm, its surface glinting with a light that had no source. The team followed its edge for nearly 2 kilometers before turning back. They found no inlet, no waterfall, no visible movement of water, and yet it flowed not forward, but in slow spirals, as if it were breathing. When they returned to the surface, their watches were 4 hours behind local time. They had been gone only 1. Rahman's notes mentioned something stranger still. The walls of the cavern were covered in carvings. Not hieroglyphs, but flowing lines resembling waves or ripples, repeating in a pattern that seemed to pulse with the sound of the river. When they shone their lights across the water, the symbols reflected upward, glowing faintly as if the stone itself remembered illumination. Samples of the rock later revealed traces of manganese oxide, a mineral that fluoresces under certain frequencies, but none of the researchers' lamps could replicate the effect. Locals around Minya had long told stories of an underground Nile that once carried the souls of the dead to a second horizon. Ancient funerary hymns from the pyramid text spoke of the river beneath the river, the hidden path of Osiris, whose waters wash the forgotten into becoming. Perhaps this was the same myth, reappearing not in temple or scripture, but in stone. In 1952, Rahman attempted a second descent, this time with advanced diving gear. He never resurfaced. His two assistants, who waited above, claimed the water's surface began to shimmer violently moments after he disappeared, releasing a low hum that reverberated through the rock. When rescue teams arrived, the cavern was flooded. The passage collapsed soon after. The site was sealed and largely forgotten, though Rahman's widow later claimed he had left behind a series of sketches, drawings of the river winding beneath columns shaped like ribs, and human forms walking along its banks, their reflections glowing brighter than their bodies. The sketches now reside in a private archive in Cairo, and signed but unmistakably his hand. In the 1980s, a hydrologist named Dr. Hassan El-Masri used seismic imaging to search for the subterranean current. He found faint anomalies, a network of channels roughly paralleling the Nile's course, extending as far south as Aswan. Some were filled with liquid, though none matched known aquifers. They behave like veins, El-Masri wrote, but veins of what or whom I cannot say. Modern imaging satellites have since confirmed minute gravitational variations in the same region, consistent with vast empty cavities filled with dense fluid. Official reports attribute them to geological anomalies, but within the small circle of Egyptologists and geophysicists who study the metaphysical intersections of myth and earth, the theory persists. The lost river exists and it flows still. They believe its water is not merely physical, but mnemonic, a current of memory, carrying the world's forgotten stories in endless motion beneath the crust of time. Some say it is the Nile's shadow, its twin spirit, collecting everything that the sun burns away above ground. Fishermen near the Fayum claim that when the wind dies at night, they sometimes hear a sound rising through the soil, a faint whisper, like water sighing beneath their feet. And once each year, during the hottest week before the flood season, the sand near Minya darkens briefly, as though dampened from below. It leaves no moisture, no trace, only scent, cool, mineral, almost sweet. Perhaps that is all it is, condensation, pressure, coincidence. But perhaps the river never stopped flowing. Perhaps it simply turned inward, seeking silence after too many ages of human thirst. And somewhere in that darkness, it moves still, winding beneath tombs, temples, and forgotten chambers, carrying the weight of civilizations dissolved into dust. When all that we have written is gone, and all we have built returns to sand, the lost river will continue its journey, murmuring softly in the dark. Because water, like memory, never dies. It only learns to move without being seen. High above the desert plain, where the mountains of Aswan dissolve into violet haze, stands an ancient observatory, a ring of stone circles cut into the plateau known as Nabta Playa. Archaeologists say it predates Stonehenge by more than 2,000 years. To the casual traveler, it is only a scattering of boulders, wind-worn and unremarkable. But at dusk, when the air cools and the desert stills, the alignment of those stones reveals its true shape, a window into the rhythm of the sky. The ancients placed them there not to watch, but to listen. Among the handful of scholars who devoted their lives to understanding Nabta's purpose, one name stands apart: the astronomer and linguist Dr. Mahmoud El-Khalil. In the late 1970s, he camped alone in the desert for nearly half a year, mapping every alignment, every shadow, every star that crossed the stones. His notes, found after his disappearance, read more like scripture than science. They did not look upward, he wrote. They entered the sky through sound. It began with the wind. Each night, as the temperature fell, the air moving through the stone passages produced tones, low, harmonic murmurs that shifted with the constellations. Dr. El-Khalil recorded these vibrations and realized that the pitch changed with the rising of Sirius and Orion, as if the stars themselves altered the air. He described it as the breath of the gods, an ancient resonance that turned starlight into sound. When his recordings were played through a spectrograph, they revealed frequencies consistent with infrasound, vibrations below the threshold of human hearing. Such frequencies, modern researchers know, can cause vivid dreams, disorientation, and even feelings of presence. Perhaps, in that silent age, the priests of Nabta entered trance not through ritual, but through listening, attuning their breathing to the cosmos until they felt the pulse of creation itself.